Paul, let's talk about, first of all, before we talk about the roster and the comings and goings of this squad, the buzz in the city, Paul. How are the fans of Orlando getting ready within a few short months to watch their first MLS game in their city? Is there excitement? Is there purchases of jerseys? Are the groups getting together for Christmas? Give us an insight how things are going down there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there's a lot of excitement here in Orlando. The club has done a very, very good job to keep its name in the, I guess, out there. You know, I mean, they're constantly being talked about. They're constantly finding ways to hold events, you know, whether it's the stadium groundbreaking or Kaká signing or, you know, a new jersey or a new logo. They're constantly holding events and throwing parties and things to celebrate. And, you know, actually one of the smaller things they've done that I thought has been brilliant is they have this thing, Magnet Monday, where they're giving out free Orlando City magnets with the logo on it. And now these magnets are everywhere. You can't drive down a street in Orlando or go into a parking lot without seeing the Orlando City logo on the back of somebody's car or a magnet on a mailbox on a street corner. I mean, it's everywhere. Their logo, their brand is all over the city, and I think that's been really smart. You know, certainly there's been a core of fans that have followed this team over the last 4 years in USL Pro, but they want to grow on that, and they want to grow on that by a lot going into MLS. And so, you know, there certainly has been a lot of excitement, and I think it's going to continue to grow. And I actually think, you know, people don't really understand how big it's going to be once the games start, because I think once people get an idea of what the atmosphere and the games are going to be like in MLS, where it's right in the middle of downtown versus, you know, a 30-minute drive down to Disney where they played last year, I think it's going to get even bigger here in Orlando.
Paul, let's talk about the youth clubs down there, the youth coaches, all sorts of different academies. How excited are they to see a professional game in their city from MLS? How excited are they that they can actually get some of those players out to their clubs and have clinics, some of the coaches? This has got to be outstanding.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Central Florida has been an area that's definitely produced some strong players in the past. I mean, Graham Zusi is from right here in Orlando. Dax McCarty, who stands out for the New York Red Bulls. He's a Winter Park native right here in Orlando area. So they've been able to turn out some good players. They just have never had their own professional team. And I think there's definitely an excitement that finally the league has found its way back to Florida and that it's ended up in Orlando. And I think, you know, Orlando City has done a good job establishing a youth academy, and I think that's going to be a big area that they grow over the next few years. And they've gone out and they've made some strong hires early on. 2 college coaches that were assistants at prominent programs. One of the coaches came from UNC, you know, an ACC power that's perennially at the top of the NCAA. So they're doing a really, you know, I think that's a smart approach to try to get some really established coaches in the system and start to grow some homegrown talent and get more and more youth involved. And they already have one homegrown signing in Tommy Redding, a 17-year-old center back who, you know, really has a lot of talent and turned down a few European teams to stay home and be the first homegrown signing for the Orlando MLS team.
You know, Paul, no disrespect to Tampa Bay or Miami. I go way back to the NASL days when the Tampa Bay Rowdies played, and I even go back to the early days of MLS where Miami did have a franchise and Tampa Bay, the Mutiny, and they both failed. Something tells me that this time around in Florida, it's going to be a success in Orlando because it's community-based, it's a family atmosphere, they're pure soccer fans, unlike, I believe, in Miami where it would be more of a star-studded lineup of people coming and going to watch games and not really, I could be wrong, knowledgeable fans. Am I way off base there?
You know, I think I don't want to speak to what the fans were maybe in Tampa and Miami, but I think the difference is that this club was built, it didn't just show up. You know, I think it was important that they came in and they had a USL team that for 4 years did establish that relationship with the community and did start to kind of grow its fan base within Orlando and really attach itself to Orlando's identity. And I think another big key is that, you know, this is a market that's only got one other professional team in the Orlando Magic, the NBA team. And so I think it's a city that really wants to have more that it can identify with and that the nation can identify to Orlando. And, you know, this is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. It's very young. It's full of millennials. I think they're redefining what Orlando is and making downtown Orlando just as part of the city's identity as Disney is. You know, people talk about Orlando and they talk about Disney, and I think you're now starting to see the city kind of want to be more than just Disney. And I think Orlando City Soccer has really grabbed a hold of that process and said, hey, look, we're going to be that representative for you. And I think that's, you know, I think that's going to lend to a lot of success early on, because they are able to grasp onto that same generation that's trying to say, hey, we're Orlando, we're growing, we're a vibrant city, and we matter just as much as Tampa or Miami, two bigger markets that get a lot more attention, and we're going to do things right. So, yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a totally different approach, and I think it's got a chance to be very, very successful here, and maybe the Southeast can start to produce some of the same fandom that we've seen in the Pacific Northwest.
Paul, let's talk about the squad. It's shaping up, in my mind, to be a pretty decent squad the first year in. I'm really excited to see Tally Hall once he gets recovered from that devastating injury and the surgery he had. We've had Tally Hall on our show a few times, and in his peak a couple years ago, I would consider him either 1 or 1A, the best in MLS. I think this guy, once he's healthy, is going to bring a lot to the table. Colin from Sporting Kansas City, a winner, a beast there in the back end. And then you've got Kaká, obviously, new signing in the Honduran, Brian Rochez. But I don't think you're done. You mentioned Dax McCarty. Wouldn't surprise me if he makes his way down there. And I think what's important, and you can talk about this, is the Canadian, the assistant coach, Mark Watson, who knows the league inside out, will probably look to try to get the club to add a couple more veterans. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a big deal to them that they add guys with MLS experience. And as we know, Orlando City has gone after Dax McCarty. It's been reported that they definitely put a big package together. And, you know, I don't think that they necessarily are done trying. I mean, if you look, like you said, they are very clear that they're trying to build the spine of this team. They've got Tally Hall, and in his absence as he comes back from an ACL, Donovan Ricketts, obviously, two very established goalkeepers, Aurelian Collin, Amobi Okugu, who I think is going to be a very good player for them in the defensive center midfield, Kaká, and then I think they're still looking for a guy to be that striker. Maybe it's Rochez, maybe it's Arrieta, but they want to build that spine. And if you can throw a Dax McCarty into the defensive center midfield next to Amobi Okugu, now you're talking about maybe one of the best central midfield pairings in the entire league behind Kaká, and he's all of a sudden got free reign to roam the field as much as he wants. His defensive responsibilities are lessened incredibly by that type of pairing, and so I think it makes a lot of sense for them to try to get Dax McCarty into Orlando. I also think once the Brek Shea signing becomes finalized, I think that'll happen later this week or next week. You know, that's a guy who, yes, he struggled in England over the last 2 years, but when he left, he was one of the best players in MLS. He played for an MLS title. He was an MLS MVP candidate in 2011. You know, he was a guy who, when he was playing with confidence, was one of the best and most creative players in MLS. And he's young. He's still only 24 years old. He'd be coming back looking to prove a lot. You throw a guy like that into the lineup, you add another experienced piece right there. And I think people maybe undervalue that aspect of Brek Shea because it's very easy to point at what's happened to him over at Stoke City and say, oh, well, he's not relevant anymore. You know, I still think he's a guy that can come over and have a huge impact right away. So you can see the pieces starting to come together. You know, there will be some question marks. You know, how will Kevin Molino transition from the USL to MLS? Well, I mean, look at Dom Dwyer. He had set the USL record with Orlando City. I think he had 17 goals. Kevin Molino scored 20 goals. And look at what Dom Dwyer did with Kansas City this past year. And I think they're hoping that Kevin Molino can have that same type of transition. They really believe he can be a special player, but, you know, how will that transition happen? I think their outside backs, Luke Bowden, a veteran from England who's played very well for Orlando City, and on the other side, Rafa Ramos and Tyler Turner, two under-20 prospects, one for the U.S., one for Portugal. You know, what's going to happen with those guys? Are they going to be ready to compete from day one in MLS? So there are those question marks, but I do think you're starting to see a very strong core, and I think that they have the right pieces there. It's just a matter of how quickly it comes together in this first season.
You know, Paul, you're banging on about Brek Shea. A couple weeks ago, we had on a former FC Dallas coach and a legend in North America, Shaylis Hinman, and we talked about Brek Shea. We talked about that final here in Toronto where they lost to Colorado Rapids, and he raved about Brek Shea and how his future would be very, very bright for Team USA and wherever he played. And I think he's going to bring a lot to the table. He knows this league, and I think once Orlando does sign him, this will be a major, major coup for this club. Let's talk about a couple other things before we let you go, Paul, quickly. I had the privilege of watching throughout the summer Kyle Lauren, who is a Canadian and right now projected to be either 1 or 2 in the draft coming up. I know that Orlando would love to have him. What are you hearing out there? Is Orlando projecting to go after Lauren big time?
I think he's definitely one of the few candidates there. I think it'll be interesting to see if Lauren decides to go to MLS or if maybe he explores his options overseas in Europe. I think that's the first thing we have to kind of wait and see. Will he sign a Generation Adidas contract? Will he stay in North America, or will he go over to Europe? But certainly, as we said, I mean, forward is a position that Orlando City is still trying to fill. I mean, they've got a lot of pieces. Well, they've got 3 pieces there right now. Brian Roches, the new DP, who's very young, unproven in this league yet, but they hope can be somebody special. Jairo Arieta, the Costa Rican forward from Columbus Crew, a veteran who maybe is the guy that starts the season. And then Danny Mwanga, a prospect who was the first overall pick in 2010, but hasn't played that well in the last 3-4 years. So would they be willing to take a risk on another young forward and say, hey, look, can you make that transition quickly to MLS? I think they would. I think he's a very strong candidate for them. I think when you look at who else would be at the top of the draft, you've got guys like Josh Yarrow, who's a center back. Well, Orlando City already has Tommy Redding, the young 17-year-old center back. Maybe they don't want another young center back. So I absolutely think he could be Kyle Lauren could be a huge possibility for Orlando City, but I think we've got to wait and see whether he signs that GA deal or maybe explores his options elsewhere.
Paul, as we close it out, we really appreciate your time, but we can't let you go without telling us what the numbers are in season ticket sales and what is the capacity at the stadium where Orlando's going to play in their first season.
Yeah, well, I think they're kind of up over 8,000, 9,000, somewhere in that region of season tickets sold. I think there's going to be a really big push here in the next week or so. You know, they made a big push at the World Cup, sold 7,500 season tickets in a week, and they kind of haven't talked too much about season tickets since then. When I spoke to people at the club about that, they said, look, we're going to make 2 big pushes here coming up. Obviously, one around the holidays, try to get a lot of people to buy tickets for Christmas and elsewhere, for other reasons right around then. And then when the MLS schedule comes out, I'm hearing that might not be till the new year in January at some point. I think there'll be another big push. So they're aiming for 12,000, 13,000 season tickets sold going into that first year. And the first year they're going to be playing at the new renovated Citrus Bowl in Orlando while they build their new soccer-specific stadium. That won't be ready until 2016. So they'll be playing in a big football stadium. They're only going to open the lower bowl for most games, so it'll be around 22,000 capacity. Though, I will tell you this, the goal for Orlando City is for its season opener, they want to sell out the entire Citrus Bowl. And if they're able to do that, you're talking about 65,000 people in the Citrus Bowl to see Orlando City's first MLS game.